Okay, any doubts related to the last session? The one which we discussed for simple transform in the normalize. Ravali and Bhagyaraj, any doubts?
Nothing as of now.
Okay.
Yeah, Venkat, can you show me one example of this serial data through normalization process, if possible?
As of now, I don't have it. I'll make the graph ready and then I will show you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay. Then let me start with multi-stage transform. Okay. In the normalize, yesterday we have seen defining a simple transform. Along with the simple transform, we can define multi-stage transform also. So what is the benefit of defining a multi-stage transform in the normalize? So by doing this, it gives a more control over the output records. So yesterday's session, what we discussed in the simple transform, whatever the vector data we are getting, that we are making it into a serial. So we are not modifying any of the data or we are not doing any of the calculations. Just a vector to the serial. But if you want to do any of the calculations and the transform, then we should be having a more control over the output record. So in such a case, we have to go for a multi-stage transform. And if you are doing this, then we have to define some of the functions which are mandatory. That is a temporary type declaration, initialization, a normalize and finalize. Let me write down. That is a type declaration, initialization, normalize, finalize. So along with this, the length function will be a mandatory. So all these five functions are the mandatory functions in the inputs multi-stage transform. So along with this, we have two more functions which are optional. Based on the requirement, we can define these functions. That is input select and we have output select. So totally 7 functions we have to define based on our requirement, but the 5 functions are the mandatory functions that needs to be defined when we are going for multi-stage transform. So let us discuss with the yesterday's example data. So let's say the first record is coming to the multi-stage transform from the input file component to the normalize, and once the record comes to the normalize component through the import over the flow, and a parameter called a transform will get executed in the normalize, and first the function which get executed is the input select. So we can write any conditions like in yesterday's class we have seen entrance is one of the field which we have it a decimal, an integer or a decimal data. So I can write down like if the number of transactions are more than 2, then only I need to process this. Yes, such kind of the filtrations we can write it. So not only here, whenever you see in any of the components like input select, the function or a select parameter, this is equivalent to the where class in the DBMS. Any of the database commands, whatever we write, which we have like a where class statement, exactly equivalent to this input select or the select parameter in any of the components. Just to filter the records before processing ahead, we will be using this input select. So like this, one example is entrance is greater than 2, I will be defining it. So whenever the transactions are more than 2, only those records we will be processing it. So once the input select has been satisfied by the record or the condition becomes true, then the next function which get executed is the length function. So let's say like I said greater than 2, So first record will not be satisfied, and once the input select returns false, immediately the next input record will be read from the flow from the input file component. So the second input record comes. Let me show the data to you, because okay. Okay, the first input record comes. We have written an input select statement like entrance greater than 2. So the condition fails and immediately the next input record will be read. So whenever the next input record reads, entrance is greater than 2, that is 3 is greater than 2. Yes, the condition true, then the length function will get executed and the returns 3. The same function whatever we have seen that could be used with the length of in-dot transactions. The length of is a predefined function which takes vector as an argument and returns the size of the vector. So once the length function has been executed, this is the first time we are processing that record. So the declaration and initialization has been executed. We will see more in detail about the declaration and initialization. Any of the variables whatever we wanted to use as process of this normalize, then we can define a declaration and initialization of those variables. And one more change in the multi-stage transform for the normalize function is in simple transform, the normalize takes two arguments, in and index, that is input record and the index variable as an argument, and returns the output record to the output port. So once the normalize has been executed in the simple transform, the record is flowing to the output port. But in multi-stage transform, the normalize function takes temporary type, input, and index as an arguments and returns updated temporary type. So what does it mean? So whatever the variables we have declared and initialized, all those variables can be accessed here in this variable. So how we are accessing whenever I say in, the complete input record, whatever it is coming to the normalized from the flow, the complete record we are able to access it. So similarly, whenever we say the temp, yeah, not only exactly we can give it. So whatever we have written at the declaration here, same thing we can give it here. So but the first argument is always accessible by the variables whatever we have declared and initialized, and similarly index again starts with 0. So let me say the initialization can be done by 0, and once the normalize has been executed, the temporary type variables has been transformed to 2, transformed to 10. Then it returns updated temporary type. Whatever the variables we have declared, one example, one variable I am telling you. So the updated value it will return. But what is the type? Again, it returns of same temporary type. Then it calls the finalize. So in multi-stage transform, normalize will not be having a control to return the record to the output port. Finalize will be having that control. Once the normalize has been processed the records, then it returns the record to the finalize function, and finalize will process and returns the record to the output port. Whatever we have seen the normalize in the simple transform, the same functionality will be done by the finalize function. And before sending the records by the finalize function to the output port, if you want to filter any of the records, then output select could be used. So it's like after processing, if you want to filter any of the records, then we have to use an output select. Before processing, then we have to use input select. So like this. Now for the second record, we have vector size 3. The length has written 3. Declaration and initialization has been executed, and for index 0, the normalize, finalize and output select will be get executed. Once all these functions get executed. Again, the control will come to the normalize and increments the index by 1 and executes and returns updated temporary type, then finalize and output select. This control has run for index 1. Again it becomes, again the control goes to normalize and increments by 1, index becomes 2, executes the normalize, finalize and output select. Again the control comes to normalize and becomes index 3, but the condition fails. Always the index should be less than the length. So length returns 3. Now the index variable is also 3. So the control comes out of this normalize and reads the next input record by the input select. If the condition satisfies, again the length function will get executed, then type declaration and initialization will get executed, and then the following functions will get executed. So here what I wanted to conclude of these functions are: input select will be executed once for each input record, length will be executed once for each input record, declaration and initialization will be executed once per input record, and whatever the size the written by the length function, those many times the normalize, finalize and output select will get executed. And the difference for the normalize in the simple transform and multi-stage transform is: simple transform takes input and index as an argument and returns the record to the output port. But in multi-stage transform, normalize take temporary type, input and index as an arguments and returns updated temporary type. So theoretically it's clear, right? The multi-stage transform and the execution flow of each of the functions within the normalized component. Ravali and Bhagirash, is it clear?
Yeah,
Yes,
Venkat.
Venkat. You'll be, I mean, you will
Venkat,
explain it logically, right?
Yeah. One can ask the hello. Yeah, one can proceed.
No, my question was, will you be showing this in the GDE with the graph and everything?
Yeah, we will execute the graph how we have seen yesterday, but whatever the execution flow I said, like input select one time, length one time, in declaration and initialization once it get executed, and the length number of times normalize, finalize, output select will execute it. This by this version we cannot show you. Internally how this execution will happen, I'm explaining you. Internally this is how it executes.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, but
Okay.
you were asking something.
And
Yeah, Ravali.
Venkat, sorry.
Your voice is breaking, Ravali.
Um,
Yeah, tell me.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, my other question was, can you actually show me or show us, like, how to develop the graph?
Okay. Yeah, that we will take it.
Because I'm completely, so I don't know how to develop a graph. I mean, these
Yes. Yeah.
normalization, these components and everything, the basics of the graph.
Yes. First, we will discuss each of the component. Then, once these transform components are
Oh,
completed, then I will give you one scenario for you. So you try it. Then we will discuss developing that. Is it fine? To implement that requirement, it's
I
not
mean,
just.
how do you want us to try
Pardon?
it?
Pardon?
How do you want us to try it?
Your voice is breaking. I'm
I
unable
mean, I
to.
don't have any software, anything installed. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, my question was, how do you want us to try it? Because I don't have any software, anything installed for Abinitio.
Uh, you have VMware with Windows XP.
I don't have it, but I can try to get it, I guess.
Okay, if you can get the VMware and install with Windows XP only, then I will provide you the software. That will not contain the whatever the graphs I'm showing you. It's just a software you have to install, and from starting we have to make the graphs ready. I will provide you the software. You
Okay.
can try for that, but it should be only Windows XP that will support.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Okay, fine. Of course, it will take time. By
Okay,
the
I'll
time
try.
you make
I'll
it,
let you know when I.
yeah, it will take some time. By the time if you get ready, then once we discuss these transform components, we will give you one scenario. See now whatever the graphs are, like first I'm taking one component and explaining each of the parameters and the execution flow, the behavior, everything I'm explaining, so that each of the components it will be more clear what it will do. Then what the requirement whatever I'm giving you is it should be integrated with multiple components. So if you want to develop one graph, it should be integrated with multiple components. If you want to do that, and again, it should be each of the component you should be knowing what it will do. So that is where I am taking you. Clear?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Bhagraj, you have any questions?
Yeah, Venkat.
Yeah.
Means you are applying input select, right?
Yes.
So can't we apply this input select in vector variables?
Input selecting?
Vector variables, inside a vector variable.
No. You have to get the length, then only you can do it.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
So Venkat, so in that case, if you want to, I mean, if I want to delete one row for that inside the vector, then how can we do that? Means I don't want the first row of each vector.
Okay. You don't want to
In that
process.
case, how can we delete that? Sorry?
You don't want to process the element 1, element 0.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Within the normalize, we can write a condition. For index equals to 0, we should not be
Hmm.
processed like that. Not equal to 1, not equal to 0, we can process whatever the normalized condition,
Okay.
whatever we are doing it.
Okay. Okay, fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we have written all the mandatory functions, and it's not only the rule like we can define anywhere any of the functions. I can define finalize anywhere, normalize anywhere. But internally the execution flow, whatever we have seen, that is how it will get executed. In this case, the first length function will get executed. In our previous example, we have used length of and passing the vector as an argument. And here directly we are taking entrance as an entrance field. Once this length function returns the value, then declaration and initialization will get executed. So in this declaration, sum, trans date, and trans amount has been declared. And already I have given the values, means initial values have been given in the declaration itself. So some we have not defined, just to show that we can define in the declaration itself, or else if you want we can define in the initialization also, but better way of doing it is through the initialization. So once these two functions get executed, the control comes to the normalize, and the temp argument will contain like sum, trans date, and trans amount fields. 3 fields we can access. If you are defining a 10 fields, all the 10 fields can be accessed in this temp argument. So the input argument contains a 0 for the temp, a blank value for the trans date, and a 0.0 for the trans amount. So we are assigning all these values, means a normalize takes temp in and index as an argument and returns updated temporary type. So again the temporary type is sum, translate, and amount. So all values related to the temp we are assigning in the normalize. So temp dot sum will be 0 plus in dot transactions of 0th element. Let's say we are processing the second input record dot amount we are accessing. So in dot transactions means the record will come here of 0th index. The first record it will point, and within the first record the amount field we are accessing, that is 47.95. So 0 plus 47.95 we are accessing and assigning it to temporary sum variable. Before it was 0. Once the control comes to this next record, the temporary type of the sum variable will be updated to 47.95. Similarly, transit date and amount also we are getting the values. So transit date again 1993.02.12 and trans amount same expression we have written of 0th index dot amount, that is indoor transactions of first element and the amount variable we are accessing and assigning to temporary type. So once the control comes out of this normalize, the finalize will get executed with the temporary variables and input. So here in the output we want to assign customer ID, transit date, amount and cumulative amount. Let's show you the record format of the output port. Customer ID, transit date, amount. And one more field extra what we are discussing today is cumulative summary. So how we are doing this cumulative summary is using a temporary variable and accessing each of the elements in the loop. So first it will contain 0 and we have accessed 47.95. Okay, so the indoor customer ID is C003213. Translate is within the temporary variable, the translate will contain this value 1993.0212 and the trans amount will contain 47.95 and the first time cumulative sum of this temp sum 0 plus 47.95. Again cumulative sum will also become 47.95. Again the control goes back to the normalize and increments the index by 1. So now whatever the variables we have discussed so far, it will contain sum as 47.95. Before it was 0, null and 0.0. But now the sum contains 47.95. So 47.95 plus indoor transactions of first index dot amount. So the indoor transactions, the control comes to the vector of the first index, the control comes to the here and amount field we are accessing is 221.24. So sum will be 47.95 plus 221.24 get assigned to this sum, and similarly translate and amount of the index 1 will be accessed and assigned to the temporary type. And once the control comes here, the customer ID same record will be accessed, 3213 get assigned, translate and amount will be 1994.1105 and 221.24. But coming to the cumulative sum, previously this value was 47.95 plus 221.24. Totally the cumulative sum get assigned. Again the control comes to the normalized increments by index 1. Process this element 2. So once this element 2 process by the normalize and finalize, control comes to index increments by 1. But the condition false. Index should be always less than the length. So length return 3 and index also becomes 3. So once the control comes out of this fails the normalize, again read the next input record and process the length. Once the length has been processed, again whatever we have these variables, so once this record has been processed for the element 2, the temporary variable sum will be having 47.95 plus 221.24 plus 17.41. The result of this value will be having in the sum, and temp dot translate will contain 1995.12.11 and amount temp trans amount will contain 17.42. So after reading this input record, third input record, and the length returns 1, immediately this temporary type declaration and initialization get executed. So by doing this, whatever the values we have it so far, all those values are again re-initialized to the null, 0.0 and 0. So that is where it's resetting the values will be happening. It means initialization, re-initializing all the variables whatever we are accessing in the normalize and finalize functions. So let me execute this. Okay, so C002142, two records. First time, as soon as this record comes to the normalize component, the length function get executed and it returns true. So declaration and initialization has been executed and comes to the normalize. So that is where cumulative sum 0 plus 52.20, cumulative sum becomes 52.20. And next time index increments by 1 and executes the normalize. So 52, here the current value is 22.25 and previously the temp dot sum contains 52.20. So 52.20 plus 22.25 becomes 74.45. And again the second input record comes from the input file. So again the length and declaration initialization has been executed. That is the reason here the cumulative sums, all the after executing the initialization, the declaration, all the variables cumulative sum, translate and amount will be reinitialized. So here it's not incremented with 74.45 plus 47.95. It becomes like 0 plus 47.95 because it has reinitialized the tempo.sum. So that is where for every group we are getting cumulative sums. Then once the group has been changed, it is reinitializing 25. So here two more records for the other group. So 122.20 like 0. So 0 plus 122 it became, then plus 52, 174. So that is how we have calculated the cumulative summaries. Is it clear how the control will be executed within the normalize of all the functions?
Venkat, is it something like scan component? Like even I think in scan
Yeah,
also we
even
can
in the
do this
scan also
cumulative
we
sum,
will
right?
find the cumulative summaries, but records cannot be vectors cannot be processed.
And yeah, yes, yes.
Cumulative summaries concept is, yeah, we do in the scan also. Is it clear, Ravali?
And
Yeah.
Yes, Venkat.
Okay. Yeah, you're asking something, Bhagirash.
Venkat, one more query.
Yeah. Yes, Bhagirash.
Yeah. For example, for each record I need the total sum. Then how can we do that?
Each
Like
record.
for example, by summing those two, I'm getting for first two records, I'm getting 74.45. The
Yeah.
same value I need for the two records, for the first record as well as second record. Can we do that?
Can you tell me this record also you want to get 74?
74.45. Yeah.
No, because each and every time the normalize executes, immediately the finalize will get executed. So while executing this record, we don't have a control of this record. This value we don't know, first of all, when we are processing this record. So we cannot get that value.
Mm. Is there any other component can do this process?
Like getting the total amount.
Yeah, for two records.
Using scan also, every time we'll get a
I
same.
think the roll-up will display only one record. So
No, because every time we should be having a control.
okay.
Okay, here we completed the normalized component. The next component we will be discussing is join. So already you know join component, join functionality, what it will do in the database, right? So what are the types of the joins we can do?
Yes, yes.
We can do like inner join or equi
Inner join.
join. Yeah, outer joins will come like left outer, right outer, and full outer joins. And every time whatever the join we do, first it will get executed is a Cartesian product. Then an inner join, left outer join will get executed internally. So, but coming to the databases, whenever we wanted to do a join, minimum of 2 tables are required. Of course, if you wanted to do with the same table, at least we have to create the aliases for 2. But coming to the join component in Abinitio, it's not mandatory every time we do a join with the tables. So the join component will contain 2 ports by default, 2 input ports. Let me show you how does it looks first. Okay, this is how the join component looks like in Abinitio. So in the database, it's every time mandatory that we have to do a join with the tables. But in Abinitio, it's not mandatory. We can do a join between the 2 tables or a file under the table or the 2 files. We can do any combination we can do. But by default, this is how it looks like this. So what it will do is join reads data from 2 or more input ports, combines the records according to the matching keys we specify, and transforms the data and produces the results in the output. So join reads data from 2 or more input ports, combines the records and transforms the data according to the key we specify, and produces the output result. So more in detail we will discuss in multiple examples. What are these unused ports, when the records will be rejected, and what kind of the error it will show in the error ports, and what are the parameters we have it in the join component. So in normalize we have only one parameter transform, we have seen that, but in join we have multiple parameters. The first parameter is the count parameter. So by default the value of the count parameter will be 2. So by giving this the default value for the count, this is how the join component has been looking like. So whenever we say 2, so it will be giving 2 input ports, 2 unused ports, 2 reject ports, and 2 error ports. So by giving the value of the count, There are 4 ports and 4 parameters are dependent on the count. The 4 ports are in, unused, error, and reject. And 4 parameters are also dependent on the count. So if I say the value of the count is 3, then in 0, in 1 and in 2 will become an unused 0, unused 1, unused 2. And similarly reject 0, reject 1, reject 2, error 0, error 1, error 2. So like this internally the component will get changed. Let me show you. By default the value of the count will be 2. So when it is 2, this is how the component is. I made it to 3 and apply. So immediately the component structure has been changed. In 0, in 1, in 2. And similarly unused 0, 1, 2 and reset 0, 1, 2, error 0, 1, 2 and one log port and an output port will be there. So like this 4 ports are dependent on the count parameter. Along with these 4 ports, 4 parameters are also dependent on the count parameter. So what are those parameters? Select, dedupe, record required, override key. So totally 4 ports and 4 parameters are dependent on the count. So whenever we say count as 2, how we are saying the ports as in 0, in 1, unused 0, unused 1 like that. The parameters can be viewed like select 0, select 1, dedupe 0, dedupe 1, record required 0, record required 1, override key 0, override key 1. And here one parameter, that is record required 0, by default it will not be available. Based on some of the settings of the other parameters, this parameter becomes available. I will highlight that by which parameter will do that. So but as of now you remember that the count by default the value will be 2. By setting the value for the count to 4 ports and 4 parameters are dependent on the count parameter. Then we have another parameter called sorted input. So the sorted input parameter has 2 values. Input must be sorted in memory. Input need not be sorted. Okay. So the sorted input has 2 values. Input must be sorted or in memory input need not be sorted. Anytime at only one can be selected. So it depends on for this join component what kind of the input data it is getting. We have to see if the input data is sorted order, then we have to select a sorted input as input must be sorted. But on what basis we are saying that the input data is sorted and coming to the join component? So we have a parameter called key. So we have to define the key fields, whatever we wanted to do a join. Based on these fields, we have to check whatever the files we have it for the input join component. So on that key fields, whether the data is coming on the sorted order or not, we have to define that, and then based on that we have to select the sorted input parameter as input must be sorted or in memory. If the data is unsorted, then select in memory input need not be sorted option. Then we have a function called transform. So in this transform function, it depends on the component. We have to define a function. Normalize, we have written a normalize function, and in the join component we will be writing a join function, which in turn takes in0, in1 as an argument. I will be giving you the template how the join function we have to write it, and apply the transformations. And this we will see practically. So this is how the transformation can be written. If you have a count as 3, then one more argument becomes incremented in 0, in 1 and in 2. And then we have a parameter called join type. So here we will be having 3 values for the join type. It says that what kind of the join you want to perform. So what are those 3 values? So inner join, outer join, explicit join. So whenever you wanted to perform inner join directly, you can select join type as inner join. And here the outer join means to full outer join. By selecting this outer join, directly we will be performing a full outer join. And if you wanted to perform like a left outer join or the right outer join, then select explicit join. And one more point here I wanted to note is, by selecting this explicit join, most of the cases we will do left outer or right outer, but we can even get the results for the inner join and full outer join also using this explicit join. So whenever we select explicit join, and another parameter will becomes available, that is records required. So whenever we select join type as an explicit join, then only the record required parameter becomes available. But how many record required parameters should be available, that will be again decided by the count parameter. So the count has to So the count value has 2. So that is the reason we are getting 2 parameters, that is record required 0 and record required 1 parameter. So the values will be here, true and false will be there. So whenever we wanted to get, here also true and false values will be there. So whenever we wanted to get a left outer join, then select 0 as a true and 1 as false, so that you can achieve a left outer join. So all the records from the left table, that is in 0 table, all the records will be flowing to the output port. And similarly for the right outer join, you make it false and true. And if you wanted to get a full outer join, by using this explicit join and the record required parameters, make it false. Both parameters, if you make it false, you will get a full outer join results. And for inner join, both it should be true. So by selecting a join type as an inner join or a full outer join, you will not be seeing record required parameter at all. But by selecting as an explicit join, then the required parameter becomes available. But how many parameters should be available is again depending on the count parameter. That is what I have highlighted already. So here, based on the count parameter, select dedupe and override key. By default it will becomes available, but record required parameter will not be available by default based on some settings. That is, a join type should be selected as an explicit join, then only the record required parameter becomes available. But how many is depending on the count parameter. So here we have a count 2. So that is the reason required 0 and required 1, two parameters becomes available. And then we have a parameter called select, and select also will be having two parameters, select 0 and select 1. So this we already discussed in the normalize by defining like input select. So wherever you see like input select functions or the select parameters, it is equivalent to the where class. If we wanted to filter any of the records coming from the in0 port, select 0 can be utilized, and wanted to filter from in1 port, then select 1 can be utilized. We can write a conditions. Simple conditions can be written here. If you wanted to filter the records with the multiple set of the lines or the block of the code, then we have to use another component itself. That we will discuss when to go for that. If it is a simple expression kind of a things, then using select 0 and select 1 we can perform those things. And we have a parameter called dedupe. So dedupe also two parameters will be there, dedupe 0, dedupe 1. And the dedupe always talks like deletion of the duplicates. So for each group on the key parameter whatever defined on those fields, if there are any duplicates on each of the group, only one record can be processed by the join component. So let's take it a small example. I have an EMP file. So here one of the fields we have is a department number. If I have the department numbers like 10, if I have the department numbers like this, if I set, let's say this is coming from the in0 file, and if I make it dedupe as two values it will contain, dedupe this input or do not dedupe this input. If I make it to dedupe this input, then each of these groups, and I made it a key as a department number, so on each of these group only one record will be processed. So out of 3 records only one record will get processed, and here in this group only one record, this record will be processed, and on 30th department 2 records are there, only one record will be processed. But which record will be processed out of these 3 and out of these 2? The dedupe in the join component by default performs a lost record. By default, in the join component, a dedupe parameter process the lost record. So lost 10 and lost 30 record will be processed, and here 20 only unique, so that will be processed. So by default, here two values will be there. Dedupe this input is a one value, and do not dedupe this input will be the other value. So by default, do not dedupe this input will be selected. If you wanted to dedupe, then you can select dedupe this input. Yeah, Bhagat.
Means Venkat, it will dedupe based on the key.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Whatever the key.
And select query also same, right?
Pardon?
Select query. Select.
Yeah.
Select is also based on keys.
Yes.
Okay.
No, select is not based on the keys. Any field we can write it here. It should be just an expression.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And we have another parameter called override key. So this also becomes two parameters, override key 0, override key 1. So when we have to utilize this override key parameters, or so let's say I have two files, emp and dept. from the I have to do a join on department number fields from the employee table and the departments table. So the employee table have a field name called DPTNO and DPT table has a field called DNO, which is equivalent to the department number. So whenever you open, like double click on the key parameter to select, one second. Okay, so whenever you wanted to select a key parameter, if you double click on this key parameter to select the fields of the keys, then only the record format or the structure of the file of in0 only can be visible. So you cannot able to see the record format of the fields of the in1. So whenever you wanted to select the key, only in0 fields can be viewed. So in this case, for selection of the key parameter, I can be viewed only DEPTNO, not DNO. So I'll be selecting key as DEPTNO, and by this we can, the join cannot be established. So if you wanted to write like select store from EMP comma DEPT, where E.DEPTNO is equal to D.DNO. So this is the full join, inner join expression, inner join select query. But while defining like key as DEPTNO, the select query will be prepared so for like select store from EMP comma DEPT, where E.DEPTNO equals to, that's it. We don't have a join condition like D.DNO. So where we have to fit this D.DNO is override key. Here we have to select DNO as your key. By doing this, E.DPTNO is equal to D.DNO will be established. If you just define here like your key as DPTNO, then the join condition will be E.DPTNO is equals to, so far only it will be established. To make it equal to D.DNO, we have to define an override key of D.DNO. But let's say another case here also, if we have in the DPT table also, if we have the same field DPTNO, then we don't require the override key. By just defining the key parameter as a DPTNO, automatically it will get established the join condition. So whenever there is a field mismatch, then only you have to go for override keys. Clear? Okay, and the next parameter we have is,
Yes, but what if you have a third column to be joined?
pardon?
What if you have a third column to be joined with a different column name?
Two fields you need to join.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to give it another field here.
Okay, so at any if only one field name in the key, right? For the key.
I'm not getting one.
For any case, we'll give only one column name for the key parameter.
I will just show you how can you select that so that it will be more clear. Okay, so before going to this, I will just show you the record format of these files. Okay, Okay, in 0 have employee number, e-name, manager number, salary and department number fields. 5 fields we have it. And DEPT has DNO, DNAME and location. 3 fields we have it. So if you just double click on this key parameter to select the fields of the key, I can able to see only the fields from in0. Here I cannot able to see DNO, DNAME and location, which are part of in1 file. So always the key parameter, whenever you select, only it will show in0. So if you wanted to do a join on department number and a manager number, then select, just double click this. So multiple fields will get selected. So here you will get it, department number and manager number fields. And so the department number will not be matching with DNO field. So you have to select the override key for that. So whenever you double click on this override key 1, you can able to see only the fields from in1. So here I can able to say DNO, DNAME and location. So for DEPT NO, the override key is DNO I have defined. So by doing this, a join condition will get established, like emp.deptno is equal to dept.dno. That condition will get established by doing this. Am I answering your question, Ravali?
Yes, Venkat, that's what I was looking for.
Okay.
Venkat, one more query.
Yeah.
Can we provide both override keys? Like I can put key as a simple floor process, and I can define both the override keys.
Not
Will it
required.
work?
Actually, to say override key 0 itself not required. Whatever the override key here.
Yeah, but if I define like that.
Pardon? See, whatever the key we are giving
No,
here
that's fine. But if I define
is equivalent to the key, but key parameter should be defined.
So key should be defined.
Yes, key should be defined.
Okay.
That should not be null.
Okay.
Okay. I think the time reached to 8. So, and we have other 6 parameters to be discussed. Can we continue tomorrow? Because it requires a minimum amount of the time to discuss. I cannot stop in between because all these 6 has to be discussed at one go. Can we discuss tomorrow the session?
Okay, sure.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Ravali. And
yes, Venkat. One more question.
Yes. Yeah.
You were recording.
Hello.
For today?
Yeah, I have recorded the session.
Hello?
Yeah, I have recorded the session.
Hello?
Hello, can you able to hear me? Hello?
Venkat, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can able to hear you.
Okay, that's... Oh, yes, I can hear now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm recording the session. Hello?
Yes, Venkat, I could hear you now.
Okay. You asked me
Okay.
like recording the right recordings.
Okay, sure. Can you actually tell these 2 sessions? Yes, entities?
Yeah, I will forward that.
Yes.
Anything else for today's session? Is it fine?
That's it, Venkat.
Yeah, okay then.
Yeah.
We'll stop the session today. Let's see tomorrow. Thank you.